transactional lawyer to do things like this. You know, if I was a litigator, I'd be tied to schedules.
That's right.
And this way, I don't have that. Well, we're on now, and I'm just thrilled. Here I am in New Jersey. Little did I realize I'd have a chance on a wedding weekend to sit down with Marvin Flisser.
How do you like that? And you know, you talk about Nuremberg, and well, you know John Barrett?
Absolutely.
Okay. And John tells me I'm probably the last person alive on the first trial of the American prosecution staff.
I can believe that.
Everybody else is gone. And the funny thing is, you know, my mind doesn't work very well anymore. And I see people whom I knew so well, and you know, as a young person, and for the life of me, I can't remember their names.
Right.
Just can't do it. And even now, if I have to talk about somebody, I just can't get the name out. Yeah. Maybe 20 minutes from now I'll remember it, you know, but it's very difficult, you know. So,
you were born in the Bronx?
I was born in the Bronx.
Yankees fan?
Yankee fan. And we were very, very, very dirt poor. Mm-hmm. And as a matter of fact, I'm reading a book here, and there's something in today's New York Times about the Dust Bowl. Yeah. And this is the last time. And I lived through that period. I didn't live in the Dust Bowl, lived in the Bronx, but we starved. My father couldn't find any jobs. We were on home relief, and it was the most difficult time. And you know something? I still have it. I still have it with me.
Yeah, yeah.
I never got rid of it.
Yeah. Then, how did you find yourself in the military? Were you drafted?
No. I was graduated from college at the time in June of '42, and I heard that there was something new, something called radar, which nobody knew about. Mm-hmm. And so I signed up. I joined somebody out in Pennsylvania to study radar, and I was there for about a period of 6 months. And nobody seemed to know what it was. Finally, they broke up this place, and there were about 40 of us studying it, and they went and they tried to get everybody to join up with the Signal Corps, mm-hmm. Signal Corps, and they drafted everybody. I would have no part of it. I left. I ran away from them. I came back to New York on Lexington Avenue, where they were now signing people up for the service, and I signed up for the Air Force Army Airways Communication System. That's how I got into the service. And somehow or other, I had a high IQ, and I remember we had maybe 500 people who had been in. They tested 500 people at a time, and the next morning they called me in. And they said, "We don't believe your IQ. We're going to test you again." I was the only one person out of the whole group, and so they put a soldier down, and they gave me a brand new testing and whatnot, and it took several hours, and I went through it again, and. What my score the second time was 145. It was the same as the first. So they looked for me, and finally the OSS, they found me, and that's where I went. And I was with the OSS for a period of time, and finally they sent me to Officer Candidate School. I became a lieutenant at the time, and. At that time, the war, you know, the way the time was running along, the war was more or less ending. And of course, during the part of this term, I learned Morse code. Became a marvelous sender, but they figured, and I also during my school year, I took about 5 years of French. So they figured, well, here's a guy. They're going to send me with this thing back behind the lines of France and with the OSS. But they didn't need me anymore. Right. So I stayed with the OSS in Washington, and we were doing a lot of studies. And part of the studies that I was doing at that time, we figured that somewhere along the line, the war, of course, the war is going to end, and maybe we'll do something about these Nazis over there. So on our own, a group of us there started studying war crimes. And I knew war crimes in the American Revolution. I knew about war crimes. I went to the Library of Congress and studied all it. War crimes in the American Revolution, of the Civil War, and war crimes. Mm-hmm. And at that time, the war ended. The president appointed Justice Jackson to be chief prosecutor. And he appointed a friend of his to become associate chief prosecutor, a General Wild Bill Donovan. Mm-hmm. Donovan was the head of the OSS. Took us, this group, and we became the nucleus of the Nuremberg trial. There wasn't no Nuremberg at the time. There was the nucleus of the war crimes trial. Mm-hmm. And so we went, we studied, and I went over to Paris. And there we would a group already had started up, and we stayed in Paris while they were looking for a place to have a trial. Mm-hmm. And so they went around for the British, the French, the Americans, and the Russians each one had a man going around Europe, and they came up with Nuremberg. We didn't believe Nuremberg was the proper place to be. We thought that
Berlin?
No. We want the big college and big university. The heck is the name of it now?
Cologne?
No, further out. There was a university anyway. I'll come back to it.
Yeah.
There was a university. We thought, gee, that place wasn't touched during the war. That would be a marvelous place for it. But why did they take Nuremberg? If you were in Nuremberg at the time we came there, the place was a mess. It was broken down. There were no windows. They were really first fixing it up. But across the street, there were a group of buildings, low, dark red brick buildings that stretched maybe for a block or so, and there was a big sign on it. It had a black background. It had gold trim, and then on the black were gold letters in German, and it said Nazi Party Headquarters. So we figured, this is why they're doing it, right across the street from that party. And so that's why we're at Nuremberg. Yeah. And we were there from the very beginning. I led the first group of 13 people from Paris flying into Nuremberg, and 15 minutes later, Colonel Robert Story followed right behind me, and he and I, when we got to our place, to our room upstairs, of course the top floor we never used. It was a disaster. He and I had offices right opposite each other, Colonel Story, and we were the only two on the floor at the time. And the telephone, they were setting the telephone ringing. He would run down this end, and I would ride down the other one, trying to answer the phone, you know. And that's how I happened to get to Nuremberg.
What was, well, when you came in the first day, you landed, you then drive towards the Palace of Justice, what did you see? What was your impression of looking at? It was
destroyed. There was nothing there. It was destroyed. Mm-hmm. It was absolutely destroyed. This was in the old town. And the outside, they originally had walls around it. They're destroyed. It was rubble. It was all rubble. There was nothing to see. Just rubble. Period. We stayed at the Grand Hotel, and when we got to the Grand Hotel, another fellow and I, we were given a room up on the 3rd floor, and we had our bags. And we couldn't go up the elevator, but the elevator was broken. We walked up to the 3rd floor, and we opened the door to get down the hall where we were supposed to go down there. It was open. There were planks from one end to the other. I guess what do you call it? a rocket evidently had hit the hotel this way, and it took out the whole side of the hotel. So he and I, he walked across that way to our room, and at night they had one bulb hanging up in the middle. Tried to get back and forth at night, and that's where we stayed until they found us housing. And that was Nuremberg. It was a disaster.
What was Colonel Roberts' story like?
I thought he was God. I didn't know it after I left. I understood that he left there. I never knew that until not too long ago. I thought he stayed for the entire trial. I thought he was a great guy, and it was when as it happened, when I decided to come back to the States. It was January, and I was in Paris. And I said, you know, I'm going to go back. I'm not even going to go back to Nuremberg. And I called Robert Story, and I said, look, I want to go home. He said, you want to go home? Go ahead. I mean, it was just like that. He said, everything in your place taken care of? I said, there's nothing more that I can do at the moment. He said, go home. I mean, and I think he left a month after that.
Right. What was your job when you went to Nuremberg? I guess I should.
What did I do in Nuremberg?
Right. What was your job description?
My job. I was chief of the field branch in the documentation division. You know, there were two divisions there. There was the interrogation division and there was a documentation division. Interrogation were the lawyers who were preparing the case. With the documentation was finding the documents for the trial. I was the boss. And we had 4 big documentation collection centers, besides where stuff was buried all over Europe. And I had maybe, I don't know, 30, 40 people working for me. They would all outrank me. They were then even majors and whatever it was, and captains, and I was only a lieutenant. And I worked with the people in the field and the attorneys. I told them out there what we need, told the lawyers what came in, gave it to them. They told me what they were short on. I was sort of a what do you call it in football? Who's the guy who shows a quarterback? I was a quarterback. Yeah. That's really what I was there, working back and forth. Of course, the documentation division. Everything was in German. At first, everything had to be translated for us, and we had a library there where all the initial documents were placed, and every so often, one of the attorneys who was doing pretrial discovery, they would have somebody in a room downstairs. The attorney would be in a room behind a desk. He'd have a translator. He'd have somebody taking notes. Stenographer. He'd have the person, and then at the doorway there would be a soldier as a guard, and the attorney would call up and say, Marv, so and so doesn't remember such and such. Could you help us? Well, I more or less knew what we had. And I'd come running down there with a document which he had signed. You know? So I ran back and forth that way, and that's what I did.
As you were doing some of that, did you interface at all with any of the defendants?
Yeah, sure. They were in the room when I came down there, and I didn't really do it with them. I was just there. They particularly didn't like me. And I remember the first time I came in, who was it? Von Ribbentrop. Yeah. He was being questioned at the time. There he was, unshaven. He was wearing a jacket that was torn and around. The great Von Ribbentrop, what he looked like. And when I came into the room, he saw me. He got up straight, clicked his heels, and "Good morning, Herr Leutnant." You know, and I felt, gee, look at, who am I? I'm only a kid, and that's the reception that I got from Ribbentrop. I did nothing with him. I just passed the paper on to the attorney.
Were you curious about these particular defendants as to not only what they look like, what made them tick?
I was curious about them. Some of them were bastards. Some of them, maybe they were just doing their jobs. For instance, you had two admirals. They didn't like each other. They were always trying to outdo each other, and one would try to bottle up the other one up in the North Sea, so he shouldn't get his name shouldn't mean anything, and the other guy would try to be Hitler's friend.
Right.
I mean, so they always were battling each other. But a guy like Goring, very smart man. Very smart man. But he was very jovial. We had nothing wrong with him. If he were an American, he could have become president of the United States. And of course, we knew at the time that he helped people. He helped Jews escape up to Norway or Sweden. He helped them. He got paid for it. Why did he do it? Did he do it for money? Did he do it for his love for them? What was his reason for doing it? We don't know. But we knew he did that. People like what the heck are their names now?
Keitel, Rosenberg, Stryker,
I have a book. No. They were.
Hess.
He was cracked.
Yeah.
He was not. He was cracked. Of course, he went over to. He flew into his plane, and he was in prison the whole time. When he came back, I remember also pre-trial. He was sitting late in an afternoon in the prisoner's dock, in the place where the other prisoners were, and in the chairs there,
Sure. In the dock.
and they were just talking, and late in the afternoon he got up. It was about maybe 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. Everybody was leaving. And he got up. I remember anything. I know who I am. He remembered everything. Let me go back a little bit. Before this happened, everybody tried bringing him back. They brought his wife to talk to him. Didn't do very much. I think it may have been Goring, who was also a pilot, an aviator. He said to him, Rudolph, if you're in a plane and the plane has trouble and the plane is going down, what would you do? And Hess said, I would pull back on the stick. That was the first time anybody recognized that maybe he had something still remaining up there.
Right.
But he was crazy. He was out of the courtroom a good portion of the time, and finally he went to jail, and he stayed in jail. He was the longest person. He's in his 90s, I guess, when he died.
Yeah.
And after he died, they closed the prison.
Did Albrecht Speer? Did you interface?
Nothing. I had nothing with Speer. I didn't know him. I had nothing with him.
How about Julius Stryker?
When I said before some of them were bastards, he's the one I had in mind.
Right.
Everybody hated him.
Right.
Nobody wanted to sit next to him. He smelled. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't bathe. We had to take our soldiers had to throw him into the shower to bathe them to get into the courtroom. He was mean. He was a mean person. Der Stürmer was his newspaper. Mm-hmm. Rat. I'm telling you, everybody hated the other people. They hated him. Nobody would talk to him unless he bothered them. So.
What about being in the OSS and in the military intelligence? Did you have some sympathy for the Keitels or the Yodels, the military down?
That's where I said the military, many of them, I don't know what their personal feelings were. They were, a lot of them, let's say they were following orders.
Right, yeah.
I had no feeling for them. I didn't know that they personally got involved with some of the bad things that the Nazis did.
Did you ever go to court? Did you go in?
Sure.
What was your reaction going in and watching the proceedings?
It was just another. To me, it was another court.
Yeah.
Yeah. They sat there. It was quiet. Generally a prosecutor would be at his desk and sometimes just droning away, and I'd watch the judges up there. Some of them had always looked. I looked as if they were falling asleep.
Right.
Ordinarily, that unless there was something happening up front, they had an important person up there. Otherwise, it was really a lot of talk.
You were close to Colonel Story, obviously.
Yeah.
What was his reaction to how the trial was proceeding?
As far as I thought, he seemed to think that everything was going along right. Now, as I say, I just learned that he left early, and I didn't know that there was any problem.
Right. Did he ever talk about Jackson? Did you get any?
No. The only real thing that I spoke to about the story was vanilla ice cream. We had lunch together a lot, and that was his weakness, vanilla ice cream. And whenever we were eating, I would always pull over the Haroba. Hey, come here, get him vanilla ice cream. And that's basically, he was really, as far as I'm concerned, he was a wonderful guy. And I think he knew what he was doing.
Right. Wild Bill Donovan, did your paths ever cross with his?
Did I ever what?
Did your paths ever cross with Donovan?
Not really, no.
Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah. Going back to your job description, and I'm sort of visualizing you at, your offices were in the Palace of Justice.
Yes.
And you'd go there every day.
Every day.
And did you interface principally with the interrogation department during the pre-trial, or did you?
Well, only when they were. Well, only when they were. When they would call me when they were in their while they were doing their pre-trial interrogations. Otherwise, my real interface with them is socially.
Right.
In the dinner time, trips or whatever that, and I knew most of them.
Right.
And you know, it's very funny. Yesterday there was somebody on TV who was on one of the news programs in the evening, and she said her father was an interrogator of Goring. I said, really? You know, I thought to myself, I said to my wife, no kidding, who is that? What's her name? Her name was Miller. And I said, gee, for the life of me, I have not been able to come up with a Miller that I can remember. It may be that's her married name.
Right.
So, do you? I don't remember Miller.
Me neither. Did Richard Sonnenfeld, is that name?
Oh yes, I didn't know him there at all.
Right.
Didn't know him there at all. I even got a write-up about him and what he had done and etc. And he was not an officer, and we had for whatever reason, enlisted people were not permitted to participate with the officer group. Civilians were.
Right.
We lived separately. We ate separately. I never had anything to do with them.
Right.
And he may have been, according to what it said there, he and Donovan got along well, or Jackson, and that he interrogated people and he traveled around and whatnot, and he died not too long ago. I never had anything to do with him.
Right.
And when they talk about him, to me, a stranger.
Yeah, yeah. As far as some of the attorneys who were part of that, Amon was one of the principals.
John Harlan Amon.
Yeah.
Hated him.
Yeah, yeah. Why was that? Why was he?
I hated him in New York when he was a.
Is that right?
Yeah, sure. And he was one of those people who, he had a little crew around him, maybe 4 or 5 attorneys, whom I also knew from New York. I forget their names already.
Yeah.
And they were with him, and they, no matter what, and he dealt with, I think, what do I call it, a branch of, not scoliosis, that's something else. I forget what they called it now. They dealt separately. I think they even went up, I don't know. They didn't even do their work, I think, at Nuremberg for a period of time, but would come. The Grand Hotel was also under. You couldn't stay there too late, and the dining room had to close down by 10 o'clock, I think it was,
Right.
and the people, the waiters were German. And they had to be back to wherever they were staying. They had to be off the streets.
Right.
But he, with his crew, would come into the dining room at 10 of 10.
Yeah, yeah.
He wanted to be served. And this was a constant battle, you know. He was John Harlan Amon, and he was... So it just rubbed us the wrong way.
Yeah, yeah.
Now did he replace who replaced Story? No, what's his name?
Well, Thomas Dodd.
No, Tom didn't replace him. I don't think Tom was one of the people who was a prosecutor.
He's a prosecutor. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
What's his name? Who was a professor at Columbia after a while.
Or Telford Taylor.
Telford Taylor.
Yeah, yeah.
He replaced. Yeah. He also. He was always aloof, very aloof. He was ahead of everybody, above everybody.
Yeah.
There was also one other man who was like, and he was the American judge.
Biddle.
Francis Biddle. You know, he had the guy behind him. Also, what was his name?
Parker.
Parker was the greatest guy around.
Yeah.
We would meet with him after dinner if we stayed in a hotel, and he would story after story after story. Oh, he was fun. He was the evening's entertainment.
Right.
Great guy. I understand years back some president had wanted him to be on the Supreme Court, and it didn't work.
He came close, didn't quite make it.
Yeah, right. So you're aware of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he was, but Biddle didn't like him.
Now you would interface with him during the dinner hours. Is that when you?
Biddle, I never saw him otherwise,
Yeah, yeah.
except for the court.
Right.
Never saw him.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know where he hid.
Was there much fraternization going on with the British, the French?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. The British, they're wonderful people. They were the best. My secretary was British. As far as the workers, it was like a civil service. And they wore uniforms, and they were if an American secretary were asked to stay after 5 o'clock, we would get hell. British secretary, they'll work 24 hours a day. Altogether different ballgame. They were wonderful, wonderful people, And I also knew from the very beginning, when we were in Paris and we were looking for documents or information, the British were way ahead of us in London. They were way ahead. If we needed something, we'd call them. They had all the answers. So we liked them. The French, nice people. They had nothing. Nothing. And they'd come to me and say, look, could you help us out? I had nothing. So I'd give them 200 documents here. You know, that's how they got their paperwork. They had nothing, but very nice. So we did interface with them.
What about the Russians?
Zippo.
Yeah.
Except, I'm sorry. Early on, General Nikitchenko was the chief Russian prosecutor. And also at lunchtime, we had lunch together. My parents came from Poland. And of course, we had relatives, never heard from them, didn't know what happened, what happened to them. And I said to him, look, we're friends now. I'd like to make a trip to where my parents lived. Any chance of my going? He says, of course. He says, I'll make arrangements. I'll get you approval to go. Oh, gee, that's great. So about a month went by, and of course nothing happened. And I saw him again, and I said, you know, General, I haven't heard from anything. He said, you haven't heard? I'll get after them, you know. Of course, I never heard from anybody.
Right.
General Nikitchenko, a little while after, change. He's now a judge.
Yeah.
And Rudenko came in. So they changed around. First a prosecutor, now a judge.
Yeah.
Those are the only Russians that I interfaced with.
Rudenko, wasn't he somewhat of a smaller?
I don't know, a little guy. Yeah. I had nothing to do with him.
Right.
Yeah.
Did your paths ever cross a guy named Fred Niebergall? Does that name ring a bell?
Fred Niebergall worked for me.
Did he?
Yes, he came from Cincinnati.
Right.
And he had a brother who was a Nazi, who was in jail. Niebergall came to the United States. He lived in. He became a citizen, and he became a second lieutenant, American officer. His brother was on the other side.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I interviewed 2 weeks ago his widow.
Niebergall.
Yeah, Gwen Niebergall, who was a British secretary. And anyways, it was just a small world environment. She too was at Nuremberg. She met him. They got married, and that was her.
He must have. He stayed there after I left. So
yeah, he did. Yeah.
Yes.
Did you think?
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Niebergall. Yeah.
Did you, January of 1946 was when you left, right?
I left. Yeah.
The prosecution must have just started the actual case itself.
As far as I knew, no, they started in
November.
November.
And so Jackson's opening statement. In fact, let's talk about that. When Jackson delivered his opening statement, November 21st.
I think it was the second day or something.
Right,
like that.
exactly. What was the buzz? Was there any buzz, any conversation at all? Do you remember?
No.
Sort of another day at the court. When you were at Nuremberg, did you sense that this was something historic, or was it a job?
Oh, yeah, no, it was historic. I thought it was historic. In fact, the whole trial was based on history. You know, when the Russians came to Nuremberg, they wanted to end the trial in 2 weeks. Kill them all, and that's the end of it. Well, we didn't. We fought them. We wanted to have a trial for history. And there were many things that we just continued on for history. And everything was done, but for instance, let's say there was a trial, the persecution of the Catholics. We had a Protestant deliver the opening salvo on that. When there was the persecution of the Jews, the case of the persecution of the Jews, we had a Catholic present that, so that there should be no Jew would present that one, you know. So it was particularly designed that way, so that this, for history, people should see that this was an open trial, that we were doing it that way. Of course, now, for instance, in the persecution of the Jews, they had, what's his name? The Catholic, what's his name? Can't remember his name for a minute. It's important that I know the name from what I'm telling you. First of all, the man himself, he could have been Robert Taylor.
Oh, is that right?
He was handsome. He had wavy hair, and his voice was mellifluous. When he presented that case, it was really something to listen to. But he was Catholic.
Right.
But nobody knew that his law firm in New York was, what the heck was his name? Take his name. The Catholic name, and Levine.
Right.
I mean, nobody knew that. I knew it.
Yeah.
Nice guy, wonderful guy. But the whole thing was said, no, we have to do this, we have to do that, we got to do it. We said, what if people look at this at 100 years from now? We want them to see that we really did a trial, that this was not a railroading thing.
Right.
It was designed that way.
When you were in Paris, going back a little bit,
Yes.
how long were you in Paris?
At most a month.
So it would have been July,
August, yeah, thereabouts.
45. And were you getting information from the interrogators in Mondorf Palace, Luxembourg, any of that process?
If anybody, I didn't.
Okay.
If anybody did, I didn't do it. No.
Colonel Story wrote a book,
Yeah.
and within the book he talked about his particular life at Nuremberg.
Yeah.
And he talked about working at gathering film evidence.
Yes.
And he worked with a guy named Bud Schulberg.
Boy, do I know Bud Schulberg. And not only that, I am now in touch with Bud Schulberg's daughter. She got a movie out.
This would be his niece.
His niece, niece rather.
Sandra, yeah.
Sandra. I'll show you her right on my computer right now.
I'll be darned.
Yeah, she wants to talk to me. She's been traveling around, right. and first time she wanted to meet with me, and then we couldn't make it together at that. And then she went up to somewhere, Canada, or I don't know where, etc. And I'll be hearing from her again.
Oh, no question. She's wonderful, and she's been all over the world with this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's on my computer now.
Well, Story in his book talks about gathering film evidence. And Bud Schulberg, Private Bud Schulberg, was one of the people who helped.
And his brother Stuart.
Stuart, right.
Yeah.
And so they gathered the evidence, found it all over the place, and...
But he wasn't the only one in that group.
Is that right?
There were others. There was Jim Donovan.
Right.
There was... who was up in... Well, the fellow who was killed in the airplane crash, going up to, Jesus Christ. You know, when I can't remember names, it's so difficult. And I knew these people. Yeah. He was a fellow who, another fellow there, who, I'll tell you what, after the war, he was head of the Atomic Energy Commission, and then he went to Lehman Brothers, and it was at Lehman Brothers also that I needed him. I was in the brokerage business, at the time, and a new issue was coming out, and my firm was not tied up with this one, and I called him and I said, you know something, I need 10,000 shares, so what can you do for me? He said, I'll let you know. So he called me back a little later. He said, I can't get you 10,000, but you got 5,000. You got 5,000 shares. I said, oh boy. So I went into my into the office. I was only a worker there. I was only a salesperson, not an office partner at that time. And I told them that I'm getting 5,000 shares. That the issue was. How do you call that now? They used it for on airplanes to fund the direction thing. What the heck was it down? Anyway, that it came out, and I came in. I said, "Okay, I'm placing my orders with the firm." They said, "You can't have it. It wasn't given to you. It was given to our firm, and it came out at $12, and it came out at 12, and it's now selling at 8, and we've sold it, and that's our money. You can't have it not from me. It's from my clients. You can't have it. It was given to the firm." Well, I left the firm at that point. I wasn't going to argue. I would take him to court. It would have been of no use. So that's what happened with that film you're talking about. Then the person that I really loved in that group, by the way, getting back, Jim Donovan, you know what happened with him later on. The exchange of prisoners over the thing. I even had him speaking. I was president of a group up in White Plains, and I called upon him, and he was a speaker for me. Yeah, he was a speaker for me, and I rented a car for him, and he was a chauffeur, and he had it all day long, and etc. He lived in Brooklyn at the time. Yeah.
He ran for Senate, didn't he?
Yeah, sure. He lost, sure. All right. Then the next thing was, we had heard that there was a man in Switzerland who had film of the Warsaw Ghetto, right? The burning of the Warsaw Ghetto, and he wants to sell it to us for $100,000. Well, we wanted those films, and $100,000 at that time was a lot of money. Not today. That's not. You got everybody's got $100,000 today. So they went and they gave my friend, name. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, sure. Hold on, let me.
Now, stay away. Can I get you something?
No, I'm fine. Let me unmic you here. Otherwise,
give me 2 seconds.
You'll be. Yep.
Died in a plane crash. You know that.
Right.
Okay. He's the guy that gave me the stock that I wanted at Lehman Brothers. Yeah. But the one that I want to talk about now is George Dimas.
George Dimas. Okay.
George and I used to run around Paris together. Couldn't keep up with the man. Just couldn't keep up with him. I don't know if you know the British actor Terry Thomas.
Right.
With the split.
Yep.
That was George Dimas. The split between the teeth. And he said he's going to go get those film.
Right.
And so, from what we know, George went up there. He met the fellow in Switzerland. they exchanged film and exchanged money, and then, from what I was told, George bopped the guy in the head or something with a gun, grabbed the film and ran.
No kidding.
And he got to the OSS. He ran. Where's he going to go? He went to a house, an OSS house. He was an OSSer to begin with. He went to OSS, and he stayed there until we were able to bring him back. And then when he came back to Nuremberg, we had a party.
Where was George from? Do you remember?
George, Brooklyn.
Brooklyn? Yeah.
Sure.
Wow. I love it. What a great story.
Though that's the film. If you ever see a little kid with his hands. I think I have a picture of that.
Yeah.
Him.
Very famous.
That George Dimas guy was part. That was he got from that film. I don't know if you people have this book. This one. You got that?
I've got Charles Alexander's book. They use the photographs.
Yeah, the picture. There's a picture of that kid, the thing that I'm talking about in here.
Do you reflect much on Nuremberg? Do you sit down and is this something that comes up in your day-to-day life here?
What do I do about it?
Do you think about it? Yeah.
Think about it. I have to think about it almost daily because I'm the last one alive, and my name is in Washington. It's in the whatever they call that thing. Besides the outing of the OSS names, it's in the what do they call where anyway, my name is there, and I get all kinds of calls from people. Do I know this? Do I know that? And so, last year somebody came from Britain who was writing a book, and he spent a couple of weeks talking with me. Oh yeah, this goes on and on. You know, I'll tell you, for the first, let's say 30, 35 years after the trial, never heard a word.
Right.
Nothing. Until after the, when it came to the fighting in Kosovo and in Europe and all that, it started. And then all of a sudden, everybody's interested. Oh, it's war crimes. Right. And that's when I was giving lectures. I'd say three, 4 a month. Walk around giving all kinds of lectures. I got calls from people, God knows where. I wouldn't make the trips, but somewhere I lived in New York, and it's a general area. I was getting called all the time for lectures, and. Everybody's interested in it. Even to this day, I get strangers I never hear from. I never knew who existed. Oh, could you help us? Right. My uncle, I'm writing a book. Somebody's writing a book. Whatever it is, a constant. Just like Schulberg started.
Well, it's no question. Whitney Harris.
Yes, just died.
Yeah.
97.
Right.
That's my big one. He goes, I'll be the next one and last one.
Well, as far as the the IMT, Ben Kaplan was an attorney, and he's still living, but not well. But yeah, it's a small club.
That's right. Yeah. There are other names that I know. Here's your John Hall name, and send it to. Here's Claude Pepper. I knew what's his name who just died. The announcer, the radio, a TV announcer, the radio announcer.
Oh, Walter Cronkite.
Walter Cronkite, yeah. Somebody I want. And here's Cronkite.
Right.
Let me go down this list here.
Yeah.
You asked me before about different people.
Yeah.
Going, yes. The Keitel, had nothing to do with them. Also, Kaltenbrunner, his name kept appearing. Everybody was talking about Kaltenbrunner. I never had anything to do with him.
Right.
I don't imagine he was a doll.
No, he wasn't.
Rosenberg. Some of these people were business people, really. Rick. This guy.
Stryker, yeah. Bad news.
I'm trying to think of the name. Oh, Schacht. Of course, he got away with it, but he really didn't bother with anybody around. He kept himself aloof with everybody.
Right.
Strictly aloof. Of course, I think he went to Egypt after.
He did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was very aloof. Dönitz. I think he was a military man, really.
Right.
Also, a good-looking guy, Balder von Schirach. I had nothing to do with him. Von Papen, he was the one I was thinking about. Always well dressed. He really had nothing. He didn't want anything to do with anybody.
Right.
It wasn't him. He wasn't involved. Fritzy, the Frank Sinatra of the German radio.
Yes.
He shouldn't have been in the trial. Shouldn't have been there.
As you were looking through there, did the defense attorneys seek you out to get documents?
Nothing. Nothing. It was before the trial, about a month before the trial began, that a few of us were sitting around and saying, look, we got all these documents. The defense have nothing. What they're going to do is they're going to try to slow this trial down. They're going to challenge this document. They're going to challenge that. They're going to challenge something else. What are we going to do? How are we going to get around that? I don't know who it was came up with the idea. Says, you know something? Are there many documents that they really could help them? Maybe could we offer them the choice of going around to the document centers?
Right.
So I said, we'll find out. I contacted all of my guys, and I said, is there much evidence there? They said, nah, let them come.
Yeah.
So it was turned over. They said, yes, you can go also. And then they had a chance of looking at documents, and that's where they got their documents. But when the case started and the judges was asking questions, and then it came to the point of they asked the defense, they said, do you have any questions? Is there anything with the... First they asked, what are you... They fast. I guess it must have been Jackson who may have answered, what are you going to do about documents? And he explained exactly how we got it, where we got it, how it was done, where it was sent. Everything. I can go back a little bit on that. What we did and how we got it, and these are how the documents are, and we abide by them. They are 100% good. So the justices then turned to the defense and they said, "Do you have any objection?"
Right.
And the defense said no, because they now had the documents from us.
Right.
And so, no problem. As a result, we were free. We were home free to start putting in whatever documents we had. That night also was a big party night.
Yeah, yeah.
We won the trial that night.
Right.
So that's really where they got their documents from our collection centers. But there was nothing for them.
You said there were kind of 4 collection centers?
4 major ones, yes.
Where were they?
I'm trying to remember now. I had one in Freising. I had one in...
Obviously, you had the one in Nuremberg.
That was not a collected documents center. No. At one where the college was. And I had one outside. What was the main city that we were dealing with up there? Freising was out there. I had one up in
Berlin?
no,
I think Berlin?
on the north, on the sea, not Hamburg. Out there,
You in Frankfurt?
I have one outside of Frankfurt. The heck was the name of that? 2 cities there. Right on the water up in the Baltic, there was one. Gee, Christ. Could I write these? When I think of them, could I send them to you?
Absolutely. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'll send you a copy of our videotape. And
All right, but
I'll-
but I'd like to add it onto there if I can. But when my mind comes to it, I'll email them to you.
Perfect.
So you'll get. I'll give you the names.
That'd be great.
Jeez,
That'd be great.
there were 4. I'm trying to look for something here. The courtroom. Where the heck was that now? Because there's a
Looking for the judges?
no. It's at the prosecution table. Lieutenant Commander. I'm looking for Albrecht.
Albrecht. Sydney Albrecht.
Ralph.
Oh,
No. Ralph Gary Albrecht.
Okay, there you go.
So you're thinking of Sidney Alderman.
That's exactly. You're right. Absolutely right. You're right. Ralph Albrecht.
Now that
Sidney
you
Albrecht.
mentioned Sidney, that's what hit me. Sidney Alderman.
Yeah.
He was one of those people who found Nuremberg for us. He was the guy who traveled around with the other people.
Alderman.
Sidney Alderman.
Yep.
But he's a railroad man.
Mm-hmm.
Was Southern Railway, was he?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right on.
Gee, my mind still remembers
Yeah,
something.
Yeah. Good. How old are you, Marvin?
88.
88?
Yeah.
You get back to Brooklyn at all?
Brooklyn?
Yeah.
I never lived in Brooklyn.
Or the Bronx or...
Bronx? Not lately. No, I really have no reason for that.
Yeah.
I lived in Scarsdale, and that's where I spent my time. Where I lived, they tore the place down, pretty much. They were called that, I forget what name they gave it, one of those pretty bad names.
Yeah.
Here, try and look what I'm looking for.
As a broker, you also had something to do with Jackson's estate, didn't you?
Yeah, sure.
How was that?
Well, he had some stuff that nobody can handle. Nobody knew anything about. So Bill Jackson, what's his name again? The name of the law firm?
Millbank Tweed.
Millbank Tweed. And we were in touch every so often. He was a nice young fellow.
Yeah.
Really nice, quiet. Gee, you didn't even know he was there. Such a nice, thin, very thin fellow. He was quiet. And I was surprised when he got to Millbank Tweed. I said, "Gee, did he do it on his own or otherwise?
Yeah,
Because you know, but
So you had some stock, some Jamestown stocks?
he had all these stocks, and so then I looked it up. I found where they had been traded over some time, maybe 6 months earlier or whatnot, and it took me, I don't know how long, 6 months or more to sell 33 shares of this or 10 shares of that. It was hard to sell, but I called the bank. For instance, I'd call the bank, say, look, I have such and such and such. Do you want to buy it, or do you know anybody who may want it? And so that's how I got rid of it.
Yeah.
It was I made no money on it. I did it just because I just spent my time doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there was no commissions involved.
Well,
Or maybe there were, maybe, legally maybe there were something, but certainly not for me.
yeah.
But we got rid of them.
Well, that's your contact with Jamestown. You probably had to deal with all those banks.
I did, all tiny banks.
Yeah, yeah.
And I called them, very nice. And I could never do it on my first call. They'd let me know, they called me back. The bank themselves never bought one, but they, okay, place it through to such and such, and we would sell them off.
Wow. What a connection.
Here's Sidney Alderman. You ever see him?
Yep. I'm glad you mentioned.
And here, that's Ralph Gary Albrecht.
There you go.
He and I, he's a German fellow.
Right.
By the way, all the people who worked for me were German because they could read the documents. I couldn't. But he was lieutenant commander, and he was straight-laced, very straight, and spoke very German. He's the only German that I know of that kind who had the most wonderful sense of humor. He and I were always laughing. We were always doing something, pulling something on each other. You would never believe it of somebody like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But he had his law firm was at, I remember, 501 Fifth Avenue. That was cat-a-corner to the New York Public Library. And after the war, he worked for the, what's